Alright, what is up guys, it is Storm back here with another video, and in this one I am bringing you part 22 to the new dawn of Naruto / Boruto story. But before the video begins, if you like the content you're seeing, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment. I mean, they're all free, so why not? If you want some dope channel merch, the link to that will be down in the description below. And if you want to see more of me, go check out my other channels, and go follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, which will all be linked down below. But without further ado, why don't we just dive right on in. The days passed by in a glorious blur of combat. Each round of fighting grew more intense than the last as the weak were defeated in the strong triumph. Boruto had to admit, there were more prodigies and geniuses in the semifinals than he thought existed in the entire world. The more they fought, the more he saw them as worthy rivals. There were bloodline users of nearly every type: ice, lava, boil, and even explosion, to name a few. The girl from the sand had finally revealed their magna release. And there were two brothers from the land of iron whose skill at Kenjutsu was downright terrifying. Boruto had watched one brother use EI to cut a rain ninja's finger clean off before he could even make a seal. But that wasn't why Boruto was excited. Today was his sister's birthday, and as it so happened, it was also the day of her third match. Himawari leapt into the ring to the thunderous applause of the entire arena. She turned back to see her brother and her friends cheering her on and flashing them a reassuring smile. Brushing a strand of her hair out of her eyes, she turned to the screen and waited for her opponent to be chosen. The column of names and faces, now drastically shorter than previously, spun and spun before slowly drawing to a halt. Versus Mitsuki of the Leaf. Himawari's mouth parted in silent gasp as the crowd went wild. It wasn't the first match between allies, but it was the first match between friends. Looking over, she could see that her brother and friends were torn on who to cheer for. Mitsuki landed with the soft thud of boots meeting stone. The two of them locked eyes as their battlefields shifted. Himawari's side taking the form of thick woods, Mitsuki's side becoming an inundated field of rice paddies. "Begin," Mifune declared. "Let's give it our best, Himawari," Mitsuki said cordially, with a slight bow. "Yeah," Himawari agreed. "Don't go easy on me just because you're friends with my brother." Mitsuki smiled, which was unnatural, considering how rarely he did, and took a defensive stance, his hands raised. Himawari shot forward in a burst of speed, index fingers extended in both hands. She knew that Mitsuki's body was a little weird, to say the least, but the gentle fist would triumph all the same. She thrust her fist forward, chakra lancing from her fingertips. Mitsuki dodged in the most disturbing of ways. His torso could bend and twist beyond the limits of a normal man's, allowing him to contort and avoid each strike. It reminded Himawari of an owl's ability to turn its head around at angles that would normally snap a bird's neck. She grit her teeth as Mitsuki spun, her torso winding like a spring, and slapping her with one of his arms like a whip. The sheer power behind the strike sent her rolling across the arena floor, an angry red palm on her left cheek. "Sorry," Mitsuki apologized with a shrug. Himawari grinned and leapt to her feet, rubbing idly at her cheek. She flashed her hand seals as Mitsuki charged her, spitting a ball of roaring fire that heated the stone of the arena floor to a pleasant cherry color. Mitsuki responded by skidding to a stop and slamming his palm on the ground. A wisp of smoke surrounded him in an instant, solidifying into a serpent with thick, armored white scales that shielded him from the worst of the flames. Its job done, the snake disappeared. Himawari sprinted forward and watched as Mitsuki leapt backwards, landing in a pool of water in a rice paddy. He weaved hand seals, and the water surrounding him surged upwards and coalesced into a massive serpent, its maw parted in a hiss. Himawari slammed her palms on the ground, and erected an earthen wall just as the snake struck, its jaw snapping shut and crushing stone with ease. It exploded into a spray of mist, clouding her vision. The veins in her temple writhed as her eyes faded from blue to white, and her Byakugan pierced the veil of the mist. She threw her guard up and rolled to the side as Mitsuki's arm shot through the mist. The power of his punch bodily threw her across the arena. Jumping to her feet, Himawari disappeared into her own half of the battlefield, and blended into the flora. With her Byakugan, Himawari could easily spy Mitsuki stalking forward to hunt her down. He was light on his feet as he entered the forest with caution, ready to dodge at a moment's notice. She weaved a single hand seal, a clone appearing next to her. The two girls shared a nod and a smirk as the clone descended upon Mitsuki. Mitsuki looked up, saw Himawari's arm extended in a gentle fist strike, and reacted by trying to use his arm as a whip. His attack struck true, and the clone exploded into a raging inferno. Himawari grinned as she watched her opponent hiss in pain and cradle his burnt forearm. She felt a little guilt over hurting him, but it was easy to heal. After the match, medics would have him back to new in no time. Taking advantage of Mitsuki's momentary lapse in concentration, she leapt from the bush she had been hiding and struck him in the arm several times with her fingers. Mitsuki leapt away before she could block more chakra points, but the damage had been done. His left arm hung limply, unable to be used. With his right arm burnt, he was all but defenseless. "Give up?" Himawari asked politely, and a hint of arrogance in her tone. Mitsuki just smiled before bowling over. Himawari felt her stomach protest as she heard his jaw crack as it was dislocated and broken. Her disgust intensified as another Mitsuki, slick from some kind of bodily fluid, crawled from the original's mouth. He stood, shaking his limbs to dry himself, his old body left discarded. "That is so gross," Himawari exclaimed. "But extremely useful," Mitsuki informed her. But Himawari noted, extremely costly. It had costed her opponent nearly a third of his chakra. "I'm afraid I can't go easy on you," Himawari heard Mitsuki say. She watched as he slammed his hand on the ground. There was an explosion of chakra and smoke as a giant purple-colored snake appeared. It towered over the trees, leering down at her. Himawari leapt backwards, avoiding a swipe of a giant scale tail that uprooted trees. She slammed her own palm on the ground, summoning her own reinforcements. Gamami appeared in a wisp of smoke, nearly as large as a house, and wearing a pink kimono with a white sash. The toad needed no instruction as Mitsuki's giant serpent hissed and slithered after them. Gamami turned and spat a blade of water at the serpent. It hissed in anger, but not pain, as its scales shielded it from all but the blunt force of the attack. Himawari erected a giant palisade of earthen spikes that held the snake at bay. She saw Mitsuki riding atop the serpent's head, inhaled a great breath, and breathed fire. Mitsuki retaliated in kind, spewing water from his lips that extinguished her attack, and covered the woods in an eerie mist. Himawari knew it was futile to use fire against water, but its byproduct was to her advantage. She could see through the mist. Mitsuki could not. Himawari's fingers fumbled with their pockets as she quickly fished out a long, ornate scroll, a gift from Boruto. She had repurposed it, turning it into a storage scroll. Its contents? Copious amounts of highly flammable toad oil from Mount Miyaboku. Unsealing the scroll, the muddy oil washed forward like a wave and slowly began to spread. Gamami expedited the process by spitting what oil she kept in her body. By the time the mist cleared, there was a thin sheen of oil coating the grass. Mitsuki and the snake slithered forward as Himawari inhaled. She breathed fire, not at the snake or Mitsuki, but at the ground. Mitsuki's eyes were drawn to the forest floor, where he saw the telltale iridescent reflection of oil, eyes widening. He leapt forward as a colossal explosion of heat, smoke, and fire obliterated Himawari's half of the ring. Himawari focused her vision on the smoke, looking for Mitsuki. If he'd been caught in the blast, she would have to rescue him before any permanent damage was done. So focused was she on her task, Himawari never bothered to look backwards, even with her Byakugan. Her body and limbs seized up as Mitsuki appeared behind her, putting her in a full body hold with his soft physique modification. He snaked an arm around her neck and held it tight. "Give up," Mitsuki said. Himawari grit her teeth as she fought the hold. She struggled and writhed, trying to ease the pressure or wiggle out. Nothing worked. Her arms and legs started to go numb from loss of circulation. Unable to spin, she wouldn't be able to use the Hyuga's revolving heaven, but she could use a precursor to it. Gentle fist art, body blow. Mitsuki grunted as he was assaulted by Himawari expelling a blast of chakra from her chakra points that sent him flying backwards. Himawari breathed deeply as the restriction on her neck was lifted. She turned and darted forward as Mitsuki was picking himself up off the ground. She lunged, fingers splayed as she prepared to use the 8 trigrams palms and end the match. Mitsuki gave up on getting his errant limbs to work. Instead, he opened his mouth. A sickly green-colored snake leapt out. Himawari ignored her rising disgust for the technique and prepared to dodge. Only her Byakugan saved her as the snake's maw, in turn, parted and a blade erupted. The air hissed as it was cut by the sword. Himawari rolled, earning her a small cut on her cheek for being caught off guard. When she came to a stop, Mitsuki had swallowed the snake and was holding an ornate sword in his right hand. He looked inordinately pleased as he brandished the sword. Himawari yelled a battle cry and darted forward, fist swinging. She took a page out of her brother's book, using the gentle fist to slap away the blade of Mitsuki's sword before it could cut her. The two of them entered a chaotic melee of fists and steel that echoed across the arena. Between the dull roar of the crowd and the crackle of the raging inferno at her back, Himawari could only hear the beat of her heart as the two of them dueled for supremacy. Eventually, Himawari began to tire. She could feel her muscles protesting her quick, jarring movements, and her chakra levels were now beginning to bottom out. She could feel the early onset symptoms of chakra exhaustion, setting in as a headache began to throb in her skull. She needed to end the match. Now. Darting forward, she feigned weakness and let her guard open. As expected, Mitsuki took the bait and slashed at her exposed shoulder. Steel met stone, exposing her skin that had been colored a dark brown from her earth release earth spear. From the widening of her opponent's eyes, Himawari knew she'd won. She slammed her palm against Mitsuki's thigh. There was a wisp of smoke, followed by the sound of shattering rock. When the dust settled, Mitsuki was pinned beneath the giant toad of stone. The toad had long been petrified, locked in the same tranquil, meditative pose for all eternity. And he was heavy. Mitsuki found that out the hard way as he tried, in vain, to free his pinned leg. The statue was simply too heavy to lift. He was trapped, but not hurt. His legs had turned soft at the last moment, preventing his bones from being broken. Himawari darted forward, intending to end the match once and for all with their gentle fist. But Mitsuki never gave up. He brandished his sword once more, keeping her at bay. The minutes dragged on, and Himawari realized that he wasn't trying to defeat her, merely stall her. Before she could even question why, her vision began to swim in her eyes. Himawari staggered backwards, clutching at her head. "What?" Himawari stuttered. She heard Mitsuki sigh in relief. I was beginning to think you were immune," he said. "The Uzumaki vitality is a frightening thing." Himawari collapsed to her knees as she was overcome with the violent urge to vomit. Her eyes were drawn to her opponent, who held his sword in front of her. It resembled a double-edged geon with the hilt of gold and an emerald set in the crossguards. "Kusanagi is a dangerous weapon," Mitsuki explained, "especially when coated in poison." The cut on her cheek suddenly felt as if it was a much more serious wound. "Don't worry," Mitsuki said. "It's a strong paralytic. Nothing harmful." Himawari took a deep, shuddering breath. She hadn't lost yet. She couldn't lose. She had the honor and pride of her family on her shoulders. Reaching deep within, she gathered the last vestiges of her chakra. She stood and raised an arm above her head. An orb of whirring, white-blue chakra coalesced in the palm of her hand. Then, to the amazement of everyone in the arena, it began to turn yellow as flames licked at the chakra. In moments, it had turned into a miniature sun. "Fire release! Rasen!" Himawari roared, as she collapsed forward and promptly fell unconscious. Her last sight was that of her technique rushing forward, a barely contained sphere of raging flames. "No way!" Sarada yelled as she leapt from her seat. She was on the edge of her seat the entire match as she watched the climax of her two friends fight. She, like everyone else, was amazed upon seeing the beginnings of a technique that was famed throughout the ninja world, Rasen Shuriken, but not made of wind, made of fire. The miniature sun roared forward, billowing flame and smoke. Sarada wondered when, exactly, Himawari had gotten so strong enough to begin developing her own S-rank technique. Although she couldn't hear what Himawari had called it, there had been little doubt in her mind what it was. Had the situation not been so dire, Sarada would have laughed at the look of sheer disbelief on Mitsuki's normally stoic face. Then, fire turned to smoke, and impotent heat as the technique unraveled. Sarada saw the medics, who had been scrambling in a mad dash to get into the ring, after seeing Himawari form the technique, sag with viable relief. "Winner, Mitsuki of the Leaf," Mifune declared, to the raucous cheering of the crowd. Sarada collapsed back into her chair, with the sigh that neither of them had been hurt. Her Sharingan told her that Himawari was going to be suffering from a nasty case of chakra exhaustion sickness, and Mitsuki would need his pinned leg to be looked at by a medic, but otherwise, they'd come out unscathed. She looked over and saw Boruto, his eyes darting back between his sister and their teammate. Sarada frowned. His expression was torn, as if between pride and envy. Boruto sat in the corner of Himawari's room as she slept off her exhaustion. He idly perused the content of the Uzukage scroll once more. The look Sarada's mother gave him for reading a blank scroll were forcing him to bite his lip not to laugh. Sakura held her hands over his sister's chest, her palms glowing a soft green color. He was looking for a seal that could heal, recuperate, or at the very least transfer chakra to his sister. It was her birthday. She didn't deserve to be bedridden with chakra exhaustion. There were a few seals that could help, but they required an enormous amount of preparation. Days, and countless archaic sealing matrices that could fill several books. Nothing that would help today. As luck would have it, Boruto didn't need to do anything. Himawari blinked sleepily as Sakura finished healing her. He furled the scroll and quickly stored it in the seal on his forearm, before coming to his sister's bedside. "Hey sis," Boruto said, smiling down at her. Sakura quietly left with a silent wave and a small smile. Himawari stared up at him, blinking slowly. I lost. Didn't I? She said. Boruto sighed. Yeah, you did, he said. He instantly regretted saying those words as his sister's chin began to quiver, and her eyes grew wet with unshed tears. Boruto did the one thing he always did. When confronted with an upset, crying sister, he panicked. It's okay though, you were really strong, and that jutsu at the end. Wow, Boruto exclaimed cheerfully. Himawari's brows narrowed, and she sniffled a few times, but she didn't cry. Boruto sighed in relief. He hated to see her cry. Himawari bit out. I just wanted to make you and Dad proud. Boruto laughed. I am proud of you, Hima, he said, through fits of giggles. More than you know. I was trained by dangerous people in a foreign land, pursued by even more dangerous people. I'm strong. Really strong. But you're just as strong. Hell, I don't even know if I could beat you if we had to fight, he said. Well, technically he knew the answer to that. His sister would give him one small sad look during their fight, and that would be the end of him. He'd cave and do anything she demanded. Himawari smiled brightly. And that jutsu at the end. Come on, even I haven't gotten around to applying nature transformation to the Rasengan. When did you even have time to create that? Boruto asked. I wanted to impress Dad, Himawari said. He's been busy at the office lately, so I was going through old history books. I found a couple of accounts from the war from people who had seen the technique, and went from there. Of course, Himawari giggled. The hard part was developing it away from Sarada. I was saving it to use on her one day during our spars. Then she frowned. It's not finished yet, she said. It always comes apart as soon as I throw it. It's like it's missing something. Boruto smiled and gave her a thumbs up. Don't worry about it, he proclaimed. You'll master it with some practice. I know it. Himawari returned a smile. Thanks, brother, she whispered. Boruto chuckled happily. I know it'll make you feel better, Boruto exclaimed. I learned a trick. Wanna see? Himawari nodded eagerly as Boruto pulled her to her feet. Come on, he said, leading her downstairs, carefully avoiding the kitchen and living room where he knew their mother was decorating for her party, and into the backyard. Their house was nice, larger than most, but still compared to what someone of the Hokage's level of importance would own. His dad always said being humble was a good trait. He was no Hokage for the benefits. Their backyard was well kept and spacious, surrounded by trim bushes. There were beds of flowers dotting the yard, but the largest, and most well kept of all was a patch of towering sunflowers. Boruto scooped up a trowel and a small terracotta pot on his way out the door. Himawari on his heels. He led her over to the sunflowers and kneeled, scooping a little bit of soil into the pot. He handed it to his sister, who looked at him quizzically. Boruto flashed her a smile and stood, before carefully stealing a seed from the heart of one of the tallest flowers. Boruto placed the seed in the surface of the soil and took his sister's hand. Watch, he said, as he pushed his finger down, burying the seed. He began to mold his chakra and channeled it through his finger, through his sister's, who was also theirs, and into the seed. Himawari made a small, surprised noise in the back of her throat as she felt the seed burst and begin to grow. Boruto withdrew their hands, as the sprout of the sunflower grew. Boruto gently touched the stalk, allowing more of his yang chakra to fuel the flower's growth. Boruto smiled as Himawari made an excited, squealing noise. At the faintest tint of yellow begin to appear on the bud. Satisfied, he withdrew his finger and allowed his yang chakra to fade away. How'd you do that? Himawari demanded, clutching at the pot and staring at the sprout in wonder. Boruto just smiled. It's a secret, he answered, seriously. Your brother is just that awesome. Himawari threw a small tantrum. Boruto laughed. Maybe I'll teach you. One day, he offered. She nodded enthusiastically and hugged him, carefully holding the potted sunflower behind Boruto's back. I love you, Boruto, Himawari said. I love you too, sis, Boruto said, affectionately patting her head. He inwardly smiled in a job well done, as he successfully cheered his sister up. I can always beat Mitsuki up, you know, he whispered, like it was a secret. If you want me to, he added. Himawari giggled and shook her head as they walked back to the house. I'll be the one to do that, Himawari declared darkly, her brows narrowing as her lips turned upwards in a feral smirk. Boruto began to feel sorry for his pasty friend. I refuse to accept loss by poison. When I'm through with him, happy birthday! Himawari jumped, startled as the two of them entered the house, with reflexes honed and countless missions. Boruto snatched the potted sunflower before it could crash to the floor. Himawari quickly stole it back, cradling it as if it was precious. Assembled in front of them were all their friends, Shikadai, Inojin, Chocho, Metal Lee, Sarada, even Mitsuki, who had the good graces to look uncomfortable, and a handful of Himawari's friends from the academy, who she didn't see on a regular basis. Sarada's mother was there, along with Boruto's own, and Boruto's and Himawari's great excitement, their dad was there. Naruto, the 7th Hokage, taking the day off during a very busy, very important event in the village to attend his daughter's birthday party. Boruto smiled. The guests gave Himawari their well wishes, much to her glee. Boruto's smile grew as his sister bounced around the room, the sunflower still cradled in her arms. "You're adorable sometimes," Sarada said next to him. Boruto scoffed. "Am not," he countered. Sarada said nothing. She just smirked and pushed her glasses up her nose. "And it's nice not to spy," Boruto said indignantly. Sarada grinned. The hours passed with smiles and laughs. There was food, drinks, gifts even. Friends talked about small, inconsequential things. Himawari spent half her time glued to their father's side, and the other half flitting around between everyone. Boruto felt the weight of melancholy settle on his shoulders as he observed his sister's party. He was reminded of how just out of place he was. He had loose ties to Sarada, but even there, their friendship was strained. Awkward silences filled with unspoken questions neither had the courage to ask. Mitsuki was as stoic as always, and was the closest person to his situation. Himawari seemed to catch on to him. As she spent more and more time trying to get him involved, she introduced him to her friends, who had only ever heard of him, and never seen. Everyone seemed to gravitate towards the dining room table as the celebrations reached their climax. Himawari sat at the head of the table, with Boruto sitting to her left. The seat to her right was reserved for their dad, and their mom was next to him. The rest of their friends gathered around the table, some sitting, some standing. Then they began to sing as Naruto sheepishly peered out from the kitchen, the glow of fire illuminating his face. "Happy birthday to you," Boruto sang, adding his voice to the chorus as their dad brought out her cake. 14 candle flames danced as their dad smiled and sang along. There was a pop and a crash, followed by silence. Boruto watched with dead eyes as his sister's birthday cake was haphazardly thrown from its platter, breaking upon the table. The dish itself shattered as it broke on the edge of the table. Boruto raised his head ever so slowly, his eyes catching the faint wisp of smoke where their father had just been standing and singing. A whimpering sound drew his attention back to reality. Boruto turned, to his horror, to find his sister gazing at the floor, doing her best to hold back her tears. Boruto saw red. He stood abruptly, sending his chakra skidding backwards and tipping over as he stormed for the door. He wasn't even consciously aware that he had slid his boots on. It was all just one long blur of anger and hate that blotted out everything else. His heart hammered in his chest so hard that it pained him. His breath came fast and shallow, and his body unbearably warm. He felt his chakra roar to life, like a raging fire. Energy coursed through every fiber of his being as he strode down the main road, shoving people out of his way. His hands shook as he weaved hand seals. Sarada dashed out behind Boruto, Mitsuki right behind her. "Boruto, wait," Sarada called out. Either he didn't hear her, or he didn't care. In a burst of speed, she closed the gap between them and grasped his shoulder. She yanked, trying to get his attention. Boruto cast her off with a backwards wave of his arm, knocking her to the ground roughly. "Boruto, please, stop," Sarada yelled. She could feel his chakra. It rolled off him in waves. Hot, angry, electric. It was the sharp sting of ozone before the lightning struck, the calm before the literal storm. Sarada heard Mitsuki muttering rushed apologies as Boruto violently threw a civilian aside as he continued to march forward. Eventually, people took heed and cleared a path. They cleared the paved road and strolled into the city square, at the fore of which was the Hokage's office complex. When Boruto began to weave hand seals, that was when Sarada's heart began to flutter in her chest. She raised her arm to stop him, and gasped as Boruto inhaled a great breath of air. When he exhaled, the world knew the meaning of water release. He spat a roaring tidal wave of water that was taller and wider than the Hokage's office was. It swept away the building in a single wave, causing the whole structure to collapse. People screamed in fear and terror as the waters rose like the tide, destroying nearby buildings. Sarada cursed and weaved hand seals. She spat a great ball of fire that evaporated a small portion of the water jutsu, but did little else. Sometimes, she cursed not being born with a more versatile elemental nature. Fire and lightning were only good for one thing: destruction. "Mitsuki!" Sarada cried. Her teammate was already flashing their hand seals. He kneeled and slammed his palms on the ground. Earthen walls erupted, boxing in the water and stemming the damage. Then Sarada felt the air grow restless. Boruto was weaving more hand seals. "Boruto, No, Sarada screamed. Too late. Lightning arced forth, angry and hissing and chirping. It danced across the waves, incinerating timber and scorching stone. She heard Mitsuki grunt as its earthen barricades were crumbling under the sheer intensity of Boruto's lightning jutsu. Sarada sighed in relief, visibly sagging as the Hokage appeared. He was wreathed in a golden chakra with 9 tails sprouting from his back. In each of the tails he held a person. Among them, Sarada spotted Shizune, Shikamaru, Muigi, and Udon. All safe, all unharmed. Boruto ceased both jutsu. Sarada felt a shiver run down her spine at the sheer look of thunderous, righteous anger that mirrored Boruto's normally fair features. It was matched by an equally stern look from the Hokage. In that moment, Sarada felt the icy cold tendrils of dread claw at her heart. "You bastard!" Boruto spat at his father. "How dare he? How fucking dare he?" "Boruto," Naruto said, staring at him, with barely restrained disappointment. "Go home now. Stay there and don't leave. You're under house arrest." People were starting to gather, but Boruto didn't care. "You made her cry," Boruto roared, his chakra rapidly rising in preparation for the fight that was coming. There was nothing, and no one, that would keep him from literally beating sense into his dumbass father. Naruto sighed, and his tails moved to free the people he had rescued. "You've broken at least a dozen different laws in the past 5 minutes, Boruto," he said. "Don't make this harder on yourself." Boruto grinned maniacally, without hand seals, without drawing a breath, without a word. He spat a lance of pressurized water at his father's face. Naruto dodged with ease. Boruto frowned, hoping that would catch him off guard. The last person to see that jutsu had him bound and gagged. It was the last sight he saw as the bolt of water pierced his skull. He was hoping for a repeat. Naruto audibly sighed, his head rolling. "The hard way, then," he said. Boruto's blood sang as he darted forward. He was a blur of feet pounding on pavement as he closed the gap in an instant and swung his fist. His chakra lashed out, angry and more than willing to deliver its harsh bite. Naruto moved to the side and a tail of golden chakra struck Boruto in the chest, knocking the wind from him. Boruto staggered backwards, before rushing forward and throwing fist after fist at his father's face. His anger gave him the strength to fight through the pain, even as Naruto continued to effortlessly dodge every punch and hit him with deliberating strikes with its chakra tails. Boruto drew quick, ragged breaths as blood ran down his chin. His nose was broken, but he didn't feel a thing. He could taste metal, but didn't remember biting his tongue. With the battle cry, he tried to attack his father again. His gentle fist sent lances of chakra arcing out, threatening to impale his opponent. Naruto slapped them all aside, not moving an inch, and striking Boruto repeatedly with his chakra cloak's tails. Boruto fought through the pain, even as he felt bones groan and break under the weight of the 9 tails chakra. Every wound burned like it was coated in acid. Boruto grunted as one tail swept him off his feet, and another slammed into his chest. He felt the rib break and the pavement crack under the force of the attack. For a few long, tense moments, Boruto lay prone. The aches and pains he had ignored in his fit of anger were slowly making themselves known. Naruto loomed over him, judge, jury, and executioner. In that moment, against the might of the 9 tails power, Boruto knew that he could never win a fight against his father. At least, not one in which he was allowed to win. He was simply too strong, too fast, too durable. The only way he would win was by trickery. And as it just so happened, he was a master of deception. Boruto threw himself to his feet, staggering away from his father. Naruto was content to stand, still as a statue, and watch him. Good. Very good. Boruto drew in quick, ragged breaths as he tried to regain some of his strength. He'd need it. Sarada felt tears roll down her cheek as the Hokage ruthlessly beat Boruto in submission. As he hauled his bloodied body away, she felt an overwhelming sadness consume her. Why had the two of them ended up this way? And as much as she hated to say it, enemies. She watched as Boruto collapsed to his knees, several yards from Naruto. He had yet to move from his spot. Several Anbu leapt from the roofs. Descending into the city square, a pair moved in to stop Boruto. "Stop," the Hokage commanded. They did. "I'll handle this," he said with a wave, taking a painfully slow step forward. Sometimes Sarada cursed her clan's bloodline. The Sharingan seared what happened next into her memory. She wouldn't forget it, until her dying day. She knew. Boruto turned, furious, a snarl of rage on his lips. He held an arm aloft, and she could both feel and see his chakra bottom out dangerously. A sphere of angry, whirling, raging chakra appeared in his hand. Then it grew, larger and larger until it was as large as a house. It started out blue, then turned white in its intensity. There was a dull roar coming from the Rasengan, the telltale whine that the technique made amplified hundreds of times over, like a howling wind. Then it shrank. It shrank until it was no larger than her own fist, and Boruto hurled it. Her Sharingan memorized Hokage's face as his eyes widened in surprise and his lips parted in a silent gasp as the technique left the palm of Boruto's hand. Then, as if some half-mastered D-rank technique performed by an academy student, the Rasengan vanished into thin air. Naruto allowed his golden cloak of chakra to fade. A small smile turned his lips upwards. Sarada couldn't hear what he was saying, but her eyes read lips. Both my children, learning Rasen Shuriken. But Sarada ignored his words, placed them back in the back of her mind, because the Rasengan had vanished to everyone. To everyone but her. Boruto's chakra shone like lightning to her eyes as it continued on its path towards his victim. She saw Boruto raise his head to glare at his father, at the world. His features were twisted into a pleased, wrathful expression of victory. Naruto slowly twisted into one of not quite fear, but anxiety. Then, the Rasengan struck the Hokage, without his golden chakra, and buried him under the rubble of his office. Boruto laughed. Sarada screamed. Boruto laughed. He did it. He actually did it. The mighty 7th Hokage. Beard is the strongest ninja on the continent. Beaten. By him. Boruto stared down at the wreckage of the Hokage's tower. He could see his father lying in the rubble. His clothes were torn and shredded, and his body bloodied, but he was alive. His eyes drifted south, studying the inky black markings on his father's abdomen. His eyes widened, as he saw something that he had only ever seen in reference in the Uzukage's scroll. The 4-symbol seal, 2 of them, in fact, forming a seal of which he had no knowledge of. "You're pathetic," Boruto spat, unaware that Naruto couldn't hear him. Hot, angry tears ran down his cheeks. He didn't notice. He didn't care. A leech. A parasite. Without the fox, you'd be less than nothing. That's the only reason you became Hokage, Boruto screamed, trying desperately to make his father hurt as much he as himself did. Boruto's eyes flitted back and forth, as if looking for some response. He got none. His chest heaved for air, and not from exertion. He was only vaguely aware that he was sobbing. He didn't care. "If you care so much about the leaf," he raged, "then I'll destroy it. Maybe then you'll realize who you should really care about, you bastard." His eyes stung from crying. Boruto scoffed and spat on the ground. "You're no father of mine," he said. Anger and adrenaline rapidly waning, Boruto came face to face with the consequences of his actions. Crowds had gathered. Friends, comrades, civilians. Anbu were closing in all around him, though most of them were more concerned with seeing their defeated Hokage than dealing with Boruto himself. Time seemed to slow for Boruto. He was struck by vivid clarity in that moment. Everyone had their eyes on him. He could read their emotions and thoughts as easily as he could read a book. There were a few faces contorted in anger, mostly the Anbu. Boruto could see it in their eyes. Even more, especially his friends, marred by sorrow and confusion. Sarada was sobbing as she looked at him, but there was emotion prevalent above all. Fear. The villagers looked to him with fear. Their faces were haggard and shadowed, as if seeing a nightmare come to life. The older they were, the more terrified they were. You could see children hiding behind their mothers' dresses, or clinging to the legs of their fathers. An elderly couple seated at a bench were quaking. The old man clutched his cane like a lifeline. It wasn't the attention Boruto wanted. It wasn't the attention he needed. But perhaps it was the attention he deserved. And in that one moment of terrifying, sickening clarity, Boruto realized something. He liked it. Sarada watched as Boruto ran. He was so fast. In moments, he was gone. Sarada saw her teacher Konohamaru shaking her. "Pull yourself together," he commanded with a hiss. "We have to track Boruto down. It's our duty." She nodded. "Mitsuki," Konohamaru yelled, breaking off in a sprint and pulling Sarada along. Her eyes drifted as Mitsuki ran beside them. Her eyes caught a familiar tuft of brown hair chasing them. He was masked by a white porcelain cat mask. "Anbu." "I'm coming with you," the Anbu said. Konohamaru nodded. "Right," he agreed. Their chase led them on the outskirts of the city, and then into the forest beyond. "How was he still running?" Mitsuki yelled, over the roar of the wind, as they sprinted through the forest. Sarada wondered that herself. He'd used a lot of chakra in his Rasengan. "I don't know," the cat Anbu said, "but it doesn't matter," he stated. "We'll find him," Konohamaru stated with certainty. Boruto fought through the pain and weariness as he leapt through the trees. He had, quite by accident, discovered a secret of Yang Chakra. It kept you going, even when you shouldn't. You could forego food, drink, and sleep for days if you focused on using your Yang Chakra to fuel your body. It wasn't healthy, but it could save your life at a pinch. Say if your friends were pursuing you through a forest for attacking the military leader of your country, at random intervals, Boruto activated his Byakugan to both make sure he wasn't caught unaware by his old team, and to make sure he was on the right path. It was many hours later, when the sun was rising, that Boruto burst through the underbrush into a small clearing. He was promptly pinned to the ground, a needle pressed against his neck. He stared up into the slitted eyes of a porcelain hunter mask. Then, he fell into blissful unconsciousness.